the point that we often found ourselves that we didn't fit in any of these two churches. And some of you may be in a case like that. Me and my wife, at that point, we had 4 kids. 3 of them are biracial, Mexican American. The younger one at that time was Chinese, and now we have a 5th one. But what I discovered is that we didn't really fully fit within a completely segregated Hispanic congregation, and we truly didn't fit with a completely Caucasian isolated segregation. So we found ourselves doing ministry in a place where we didn't really fit. And it was at that time that God started wrestling with me and my calling. Just to give you an idea of how this started, was my children will come to church every Sunday morning, and one week they will go to the service in Spanish and they to Sunday school class, and then the next week they will go to the service in English and then to the Sunday school class. And that was just our pattern as a family for nearly 10 years. One Sunday morning, my oldest one came into the room and he has a question that he's been asking every single year. Hey, Dad, to which service I'm going today? The English one or the Spanish one? And it was at that time that I look at my wife and I pretty much just make this statement. If we are raising our kids in a church when they have to pick and choose who they're going to sit next to, there is something systematically wrong with the church, because they don't have that privilege or that authority to do it when they go to school, when they play in the playground, when they play with their neighbors. They literally just sit, eat, learn, and do life with whoever is next to them, regardless their race, even regardless their language. So if we are raising our children in a church that is forcing them to do that, there is something wrong with the church. At that point, I called my district superintendent, and I remember the statement to him was very simple. I need to be reappointed to a church where me and my family all fit. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what the multi-ethnic church looks like. But that was the statement. I want to be appointed to a multi-ethnic church. And his simple response was, it was 5 years ago, 2015. This was his response. We have 957 churches in North Georgia. And all of them are racially specific. We have whatever you want. We have black, we have white, we have Hispanics, we have Asians, we have Koreans, we have Liberians. Whatever you want, we have it. But all of them are racially specific. If you want to be part of a multi-ethnic church, you have to start one from scratch. And before I go into what that looked like, I want to show you a video that I saw this video that night after I talked to my district superintendent, because I was very clear that I didn't think God was calling me to church planting. I have some friends of mine that have done it, and I have seen how some of them have ruined their marriages, or to some others how it just sucks their life out of them. And I didn't really felt called to do that. But I saw this video that I think God used to show me something different. I hope you can hear it. Let me know if you don't hear anything. Here?
No, no oigo. No se oye.
No se oye.
No se oye.
What do I have to do? Maybe somebody can help me to know what to do to share.
I think perhaps where the microphone is, where it says mute, if you choose the option of in the speakers, the built-in output, maybe, do you see it?
Same as system, that's my guess.
You can check it also in the volume if it's down or up. Can you check that one first? Yeah, that one. Not the here. No, the other side. That one. Check it there. There you go. Put out. It's a little bit. Yeah. Let's see.
Let's see if that works. Do you hear something? No. I'll try one more time, and if not, I'm gonna skip it because I don't want to dwell with this.
Okay.
I apologize about that.
Mm.
The video setting, audio. How was my guess? Well, what I'll do is I'll put you the link in this. You were gonna say something, Saul? No?
Settings are advanced. Enable original sound or something like that.
Is it there? Settings? Audio settings?
Advanced.
Where's advanced? Sorry, where's advanced? I can. Oh, advanced. I guess that.
En advance debe decir show original sound.
Y creo que eso te da opción para usar el audio del video.
Use separate audio device, no. I don't know, my friends. Technology. Well, it's an awesome video.
Let's go ahead. That's okay.
I'll send it to you guys, and it is just a very simple video that shows, you know, how sometimes we need to break habits and how we need to start doing things different in order to get different results. So I saw that video literally. It's a TV show that was happening at a time called King of Queens, an old TV show 15 years ago, and God used something random like that to just spoke to me about, you know, taking the courage to following God's call into my life, and that is precisely the first, you know, the first point that I want to talk about today. I believe leadership starts by searching and listening for a God-given vision. I have seen it in the Bible. I have read it in the Bible that God speaks to individuals and gives them dreams and goals bigger than they have ever imagined. And I believe that's what God was wrestling with me. I have no idea or no desire to be a church planter. However, I was given a very specific calling from God to be a pastor or a multi-ethnic church. And that's kind of what I start trying to do, to start listening for the why. And once you start wrestling with that, you know, you have to respond. You certainly have to respond. The why for me in that case, and it was a selfish why. Once again, it was related to my children. I simply wanted to be part of a church that can reflect on Sunday mornings the diversity of our school systems from Monday to Friday. That was as simple as I wanted to. I wanted my kids to be part of a church where they could see the same kind of kids and play and learn from the same kind of kids that they will do it from Monday to Friday in the schools. And what I discovered in North Georgia, and that wasn't happening. That wasn't the case. So I tell you, I was in a church for 10 years, and they, you know, one Sunday they played with a bunch of Hispanic kids, and the next Sunday they played with a bunch of white kids. And those two worlds, they never collide. Once you have the why, and I'm a very pragmatical person, I just try to, you know, moving, you know, down the checklist. Okay, so where is that going to look like? Because here's the thing with multi-ethnic churches, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today a little bit. It is, I believe they're biblical, I believe they're right, and I believe they're the hope for the gospel. However, not every community reflects diversity. I live in Georgia. There are parts in Georgia where you can be in a 5-mile radius and see nothing but white people. There's zip codes in Georgia where, I mean, in a 3 to 4 miles radius, there's nothing but Hispanics. I mean, all the grocery stores, all the school systems, every single store that you needed, everybody used speaking Spanish. It's like, like in New York, they have their Chinatown or the Little Italy. I mean, we segregate as well, I mean, across society. But there are places that are racially diverse. So I start trying to search for that. Okay, God, you want me to be a pastor of this kind of church? Where is that going to happen? So I start doing just simply demographic research and start looking for the place that was going to give me the hope for the healthy and eventually self-sustainable multi-ethnic church. And I start looking for a county. It's called Nett County. It is one of the most diverse county. It is the most diverse county in the Southeast United States, 5th in the country. And even within that county, if you can see my mouse, in the south, what is west of the zip code, it is called Norcross, and it is full of a Hispanic community. It's, any kind of food from Latin America, you're gonna find it there. In the northwest of the district, it's like Asian world. I mean, it is full of Korean churches, Vietnamese ministries, Indian ministries. We have the biggest Hindu temple built outside of India, right there, and that's where it's located. Here in the southeast, it's still segregated for the Black community. It's just at the skirt of Stone Mountain. If you're familiar with Georgia, we have a history also in there of segregation. And then in the northeast, that's where the white flight continues to take place. And they continue to go that south. So in the heart of this zip code, in the 47 zip code, these are the demographics that you can see. I mean, you have 30% Hispanic, 25% white, 24% Black, at 13% Asian. That is as evenly diverse as it can get, pretty much, I mean, at least anywhere in the state of Georgia. So not only I start listening, okay, this is what you want me to do, God. If I get to pick and choose where to do it, this is the place. This is a place where I believe you want me to do it. Over 50 different languages are spoken in public schools. More than 35% of the household speaks a language other than English. And more than 65% of the students in the county are non-white. The racial composition, it is 49%, is in the school system, 49% white, 24 Black, 22 Hispanic, 10 Asian, other races, 9, and mixed kids. 25% of the county are immigrants, first generation of children. And the most important statistic at the end of the day, it is 89% of the population is not active in a local church. And I think a lot had to do with the simple fact that there were a bunch of churches. I mean, the problem wasn't the lack of churches. The problem was that all these churches were segregated and somehow was not appealing for first, second, or 1.5 generation. And some of you may already know the dynamics within the Hispanic community of that. So I had a clear understanding of, okay, God, I think this is where you want us to be. And then I look at what the United Methodist Church is doing already in that county. And first of all, I discovered that we have, roughly 50 churches in that county, which is a bunch of them. Now, all of them were declining or are still declining. And the breakout of that, it is, 4 African Americans, 4 Koreans, 1 Chinese mission, 1 Liberian mission, 39 Anglos, and 2 of those churches were hosting Hispanic ministry. I mean, there's no surprise their numbers were declining because the demographic was completely shifting. the churches were not able not only to keep up with that, and even the conference to do something about it. So this is when it gets interesting. It's okay, God, what do you want me to do? I think it's this. Okay, I have a why, and I know where. Now, start thinking in the when. Start trying to develop the when, and this is when the first lesson for innovative ministry came about. For those who are familiar with church planting, in North Georgia, we usually have followed two models of church planting. The first one, it is what we call a parachute drop. And that means when you send a pastor, he or she, to the middle of nowhere, like you drop him with a parachute, and you hope that by an act of God, they'll grow a church, which not only gives you a rate percent of success of less than 10% of those churches who make it, and this is across denominations, but also, I mean, it is, I was in a church planning conference, and they call those type of churches the widow maker, because it will literally, kill the pastors in the process. The second model that we have for church planting, it is the mother-daughter church model, when you have a big church giving birth to a second church. The challenge with that model is that you need a healthy church to give birth to another one. And the second component, which is the most important, is the reality that you can only reproduce who you are. So if you're a homogeneous church, regardless of race, you can only reproduce a homogeneous church. So when I was having a conversation with the conference, and they told me, we will not do a parachute drop. And I say, that's great, because I don't want to be a parachute pastor doing that. But then they command me to find a mother church. And I started looking for those churches. There's 50 churches in the county. So I approached almost all of them, the bigger ones. And there were 3 congregations that really wanted me to join their staff and then, birth another church. What I did discover is that they just wanted me to reproduce who they were. And there were 3 white congregations. So at that time, I had what I thought it was a brilliant idea. And I said, you know what? Why don't, we create a plan where we can, use our connectional system and use our United Methodist DNA to create something that we have not created, at least here in North Georgia. So instead of using a mother church, I tried to have an approach of 12 big brothers churches. I said, okay, let's see if this connectional system really works. And we're gonna split these 12 churches in 3 categories. And we're gonna use our United Methodist identity to make that. 4 churches will support this new church with their gifts. 4 churches will support it with their prayers and presence. And 4 churches will support it with their service and their witness, right? Those are our vows at United Methodist: prayers, presence, service, gifts, and witness. Everybody is supposed to be, believe in this. So I approached 4 churches that had over $2 million in budget. They were affluent churches. And I approached each one of them and say, can each one of you support this new church with $1,000 a month for 3 years? $12,000 a year at $36,000 total commitment for a total support of the 4 churches of $144,000. Once again, with budgets of $2 million, my thinking was, there could be somebody in that congregation that if the pastor asks, we'll just write a check in the moment, and that's it. I didn't think it was going to be a sacrifice for them. I don't think it was sacrificial giving. Then I approached 4 churches that had over 800 people in worship attendance, and say, can each one of you support this new church with 5 families for 3 years, like a missionary approach. Let them come, be part of this, and then 3 years later, they can go back to their church. Once again, if they have 800 people in worship, sending 5 families that may be a total of, maybe 40 people, it should be, shouldn't be a big deal. And also, commit to pray for us. And then 4 churches that had less than 100 people in worship. I purposely approached churches that they thought their golden years were behind them. And the approach was, can you just do one service act a year and one evangelistic or community act a year? Nothing big, but just something within your strength. And hopefully by them being part of something bigger than themselves, it can ignite, something in them. And I think, and I spoke in past tense about what I thought it was a brilliant idea, because it was a complete disaster. It didn't work. I still believe there's something about that it may work in a different conference, but it didn't work in North Georgia. In 2015, in July, I presented this project to the annual conference. My district superintendent loved it. My director of church development loved it. The bishop loved it. We make a video about it in annual conference, and everybody, celebrated like it was a brilliant idea. Maybe we have a new model of church planning. Well, in July, me and my family, we relocated to this side of town. It was roughly an hour and a half from where we used to live. And it was time for me to start, approaching now specifically these churches and say, hey, it is time for you to fulfill your promise. Long story short, from the 4 churches that we ask $12,000 a year, right? Each one of them, $36,000 total. 1 church gave us a one-time gift of $2,000. 1 church gave us a one-time gift of $500, and 2 churches gave us nothing. From $144,000, almost $8 million worth in revenue from those 4 churches, we got $2,500. From the 4 churches that we anticipated 5 families each, a total of 20 families, they gave us none. Nobody was able to send a single family. And the 4 smaller churches that they said they were going to help us, with service and evangelism, they said they were going to do it, but at that point was like, well, I don't even know if you're going to need your help, because we have no families and we have $2,500 in the bank. As simple as that. So on September of 2015, when I met with my district superintendent and I shared the embarrassing response from these pastors, and I'll just call it what it is, they decided to pull the plug to this project. So this brilliant idea, it didn't work. But then his response was, this is September, all appointments are already made. There's nowhere to send you. So why don't you stay there until January? And in January, we'll send you to a mid-year appointment. So I said, that's fine. I mean, there's really nothing else to do. The conference was picking up my salary at the time, and I said, we'll do that. Now, let me use this as a parenthesis to talk a little bit about the multi-ethnic church. Not only, the purpose of me and my family starting a multi-ethnic church was based on a desire for something like that. It was a simple fact that I believe it's a biblical model. I believe, especially you read the book of Acts, chapter 11, the multi-ethnic church changed the game of the course of history. Prior to that, it was a Jewish church for Jewish people. And it was literally until, the church decided to gather with people that didn't look like them, that the gospel start exploding. So that was the reasoning behind of trying to implement this church. So what I discovered was that if we wanted to reach out to a diverse community in Gwinnett County, we needed to have a diverse leadership team. So for me, it was critical not only to listen for the why, not only to search for the where, not only to develop the when, but to pray for the who. Okay, God, who are you gonna send to be part of this team? Because the only way that I'm gonna be able to reach out to Black people is if I have Black people in my leadership team. The only way that I'm going to be able to reach out to Asian individuals, either there is Asian individuals in my leadership team. Same thing, Caucasian, and well, I'm Hispanic, so at least I check that box in that sense. So start praying for the who, and there's two components that I want to talk about here. The first one, it is if you're married or if you have a family. I mean, starting a church or fulfilling a vision given by God, it involves everybody in your family. It is not fair for them. It is often not a nice place to be. Well, I'll tell you, I mean, if God gets a hold of their own little hearts, from the little ones to the older ones, God can do all kind of miracles, and they'll grow in their faith in leaps and bounds more than any kind of Sunday school class that you can ever teach to them. But God will do we'll have a wrestling with each one of them. And the second piece, that the most important, is what kind of team do you have reaching out to a community? And as you see in our staff, that's what we're trying to do. In order to reach out to the demographic that I show you, we needed to reflect that within our team. This is what I believe when it comes down to multi-ethnic church in a nutshell. The people that we're trying to reach are not only the field ripe for harvesting, but they are the answer of the Lord's prayer, Lord, send out laborers into his harvest. Especially lately with all this mess that we have when it comes down to racism and social injustice, there is this idea that God will use the church to bring healing to the race problem. And I think it was Dr. John Perkins that said, it is more likely that God will use the race problem to heal the church. And for us as United Methodists, at least in my case, this denominational idea of starting new churches and ministry, it is not new for them. But birthing, developing, and deploying a biblical and incarnational ministries, that is a new concept for them. Somehow, we missed a little bit of that. So once you start, praying for the who, this is once again what it takes. You have to start risking for the how. And I have another video that it won't work, so I won't show it to you because of the sound. But in a nutshell, that's kind of how the story of the church happened. I told you that in September they pulled the plug. In January of that year, of the following year, 2016, I get a phone call from my district superintendent and say, okay, we're going to reappoint you to another church. And at that time, I used October, November, December simply just to gathering people, around the neighborhood and sharing this idea of what will a multi-ethnic church look like in this community. And the one thing that I keep hearing often, it is like, man, I wish your church would have worked because, it sounds appealing. Because here in this county, you have, kids that go to schools, to extremely diverse schools. For those kids that do sports, I coach some of my kids in different sports, and I cannot pronounce half the name of the kids in the team. I'm butchering their names because they're from all over the world. In the grocery store, you may be picking up something from the shelf, and behind you there's somebody talking from an accent that you have no idea where that accent is from. It is beautiful what happened in the streets of Gwinnett County. Yet people were still driving 4, 5, 6, 7 miles to go to churches where everyone there just looks like them. So during those couple of months, October, November, December, and as I started just having conversation with individuals, I was hearing that concept of, man, too bad it didn't work, because I would have loved to be part of something like that. So in January, when my DS told me, I'm going to point you somewhere else, my response was, would you mind leaving me 6 more months? I think we're up to something. And I think they agree with that just because, how south went the church plant model. And I think they felt embarrassed, the DS, that nobody was helping. His response was like, and I'll just share this. I remember talking with my DS when none of the pastors were helping. He said, there's nothing I can do about it. My response was like, I mean, that's BS. I mean, you're their boss. You can tell them that if they don't help, you'll sell them, to a 3-point church in the middle of the mountains or something like that. But I mean, anyway, that's a bigger problem that we have. So in January, when the time came, and he said, okay, yeah, we'll leave you here, take the rest of the 6 months, almost like a sabbatical, and then we'll appoint you somewhere in the summer. In January, we continued to gather, or I continued to gather just with people that were sharing a similar passion. And on that Easter, on April of 2016, we, against all the statistics and the numbers that you are required to start a church, we started a church that April. We had around 50 people, kids and adults, that believe in this idea of a multi-ethnic church. And I generally believe that what God has put in my heart, it was a vision from Him. Because here's the challenge that I want to leave you guys this thought as we break for question and answers, was that if I wasn't able to be part of a church that reflect the diversity of the school systems on Sunday mornings, I didn't feel that I wanted to be part of any other United Methodist church. At that point, my theology and my understanding of how the kingdom of God should be operating here on earth was beyond the 957 churches that we have in North Georgia. So not only it was a matter of failing with the church plant model, but it was a matter of, okay, then God is calling me maybe to be part of a different kind of denomination, or if not, in a different state. If in North Georgia I cannot feel my calling. That's why as soon as we got a group of maybe 40, 50 individuals, I said, okay, I think God is into something. I'm gonna be living into my calling, so I'm gonna give it a shot and move into that. And I do wanna take a moment to pause and maybe entertain a couple of questions in this moment about this first piece of how do you go from getting a God-given vision into making it a reality?
So in order to do this organizedly, if anything that what Pastor Rodrigo has shared has brought up questions in your mind, or you're thinking about your own context and you would want to share something, please raise your hand and we can go ahead and start the discussion.
Sandra, go for it. You're muted.
There it is. First, I want to say I have not enjoyed, I mean, truly my soul has enjoyed a Winnabar or the Zoom as much as in listening to you speak. So I want to thank you. I want to thank Catherine, just for putting this together. For me personally, I am a second generation born and raised in New York City. And I grew up just rubbing elbows with everybody. That was the norm. And when I came to the South, it has been very difficult for me. And it's like I stepped into another planet. Even among us Latinos, like I can't explain it, but I've that healing, that connection that you have talked about is missing. And I really believe that it is a God calling, and it's God's time. And I find that the most important component in my experience is that it's not something that you can force, that it's because you want it, because it's the right thing to do politically. And, we all get on that. It is a God thing. I'm so convinced of it. And I think that in the zeal to want to be this multi-ethnic church and this community that's so appealing today, we missed a lot of what you first said, that first listening to God, the prayer, and finding that it's the right place, the right folks that come to you. So I just want to say thank you. This has been refreshing for me. And just hearing you and your story. It's a beautiful story. And I think that's what our faith, how we enrich each other this way. And I feel that we could get so involved with crossing the T's and dotting the I's, and that we lose, we get sidetracked a little, and that's where it goes away. You make me think of Howard Thurman and the church in San Francisco, that it was in 1940, 44. He started with, how that became that multicultural, multi-ethnic. So I just want to thank you. So I'm not going to talk no more, but my heart is filled with joy. Thank you. Gracias, Ismael y Catherine, for this beautiful session.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandra. And I love something that you said. One of my favorite books in the Bible is the book of Nehemiah. And he followed pretty much that process that you mentioned, when God, when God broke his heart, when he heard what was happening in Jerusalem. I mean, his first response, was to go back to pray. And then, then he walked to the king, and in the Methodist Church, as broken as our system is, because I'll tell you this idea of the Big Brother model of church planning, that was my thesis for my doctoral program. I was banking, that diploma in this process to work, and when the whole thing collapsed, I remember calling my academic advisor and said, "What do I do?" And then his response was like, "Dude, I mean, don't worry about your school. Figure out your family and what you're gonna do next, and then eventually, you'll figure out school." And it took me a whole year to come back into that. And my thesis ended up being called "Furthering the Vision of the Multi-Ethnic Church Despite the Brokenness of the United Methodist Connectional System." And by any means, my goal was to bash, the connectional system that we have, but it was really to speak about the brokenness of that. How it is a lot easier to say that we're part of something bigger than ourselves at United Methodist, but when there's somebody around us that needs the church, so often we are short-sighted. but also in the Methodist Church, especially for those who are in congregations, just like Nehemiah and the king. I believe that often we don't have because we don't ask for. And Nehemiah asked for, and the king said, "Okay, go for it." And then he went, and I mean, you know the story. I'm not going to preach right now. It wasn't easy, right? I mean, he literally was, with one hand, building a wall, and with the other hand, with a sword, fighting his enemies. And I believe, especially as men and women doing Hispanic ministry or doing ministry with minorities, I mean, that's the work that we do. I mean, in one hand, we're trying to build the impossible against all statistics and against all kind of resources and against all kind of help. And in the other one, we're fighting all those challenges. So thank you, Sandra, for your words. David, I saw that you had your hand a couple of minutes ago raised.
Yes. Thank you for this wonderful experience that you are sharing with us. That's amazing, really. And I understand also, as Sandra just said, that the calling from God is leading everything and going through whatever God's want to do. And we are just an instrument on this. But how is the structure of the church, or how is the district superintendent, or what isn't the structure have been supporting you? Do they provide for you the resources you needed, or they and how they coach you or supervise you or whatever? I just want to make sure that how the church really wants to have this kind of ministry going on.
Yeah, thank you. Here in North Georgia, and it may be a little bit different in other states, new ministries come funded or supported by church development, which actually I think right now it has a different name. They keep changing names like underwear, but you know what the concept is. And the way they operate churches, they said, we're gonna support the salary of the pastor for a whole year. Then year 2, we'll drop that 30%. Then at year 3, we'll drop it another 30. And then by year 4, when they drop it another 30, the church, keeps picking up. So they're expecting at least that's how they fund new churches in North Georgia, that by year 4, you're fully self-sustainable. And the challenge with that, it is this. Nationwide, the average giving unit per worship attendee in a church is roughly $22, when you do the math. For a homogeneous church, predominantly white churches. These statistics are based on white churches. When you translate that to a multi-ethnic church, and this applies to also minority churches, Hispanic ministries, when you have diversity of socioeconomics, that number drops almost to $10.15. So if you needed 150 individuals from a white church to become self-sustainable, that tells you that pretty much you need 300 of Hispanics or any other ethnic group to become self-sustainable. So once again, when I was negotiating with them this idea of the multi-ethnic church, and I presented this problematic, my proposal was that, hey, we need more time. I mean, to become a multi-ethnic church. There's something about that they don't like to hear, right? So they said, yeah, we're not going to give you more time. And I said, that's fine. So I went back to the drawing board, and I said, okay, if you're not going to give me that more time, give me at least a different structure. And by that, I mean, support me the first year with my salary, but instead of dropping 30% every year, why don't you drop 10% every 6 months? And at least the heat is less, and I can try to start reaching those benchmarks. And at least in North Georgia, that is what they support. They'll give you a one-time gift to start, which is, I think it was $15,000. And then they say that at the end of year 4, while you're self-sustainable, if you become a self-sustainable church, they'll give you $75,000 to buy a piece of land. Now, just to put things in perspective, when we decided to buy the sound equipment for us to do church, we started meeting in a high school, we spent roughly $20,000. I mean, we were already $5,000 in the hole from the initial money they gave us. And then in Gwinnett County, where we are, it is, if you want to start a church, if you want to be a church, the county will require you at least 5 acres of land to make that happen. And each acre of land, just the land itself, goes for roughly $100,000. So, I mean, before putting a shovel in the ground, you're down $500,000 just to acquire a piece of land that at that point, the $75,000 means it just means nothing. Considering the fact that also as a new church, you have absolutely no collateral, right, to get a loan or anything. So that's how they fund ministries. Now, prior to me, the 11, and we start one church per year almost in North Georgia, the previous 11 churches that they start here were all white churches, led by white pastors. And just to make it worse, they were all 11 males, but then that's another problem. But and then after me, all of them have continued to be white guys, and that's just a systematic issue. But their support, it is, just towards the pastor. For me, and the reason of me asking for funds from these different churches, it was nothing else but to hire a diverse staff. And that was, for me, that was so critical to be able to get those funds, because I knew that if I was by myself in the streets, I was going to end up with a bunch of Hispanic people. I mean, and if I wasn't even careful, I was going to end up with a bunch of Mexican people around me. Once again, the only way to reach a different crowd was to have a different leadership team. So when the church, didn't work in September, they continued to pay my salary. So then on Easter of that year, when we launched as a church, by any means, we were self-sustainable. I have 50 people that we were not even close to do that. So my first goal was to negotiate with them, and that's what it is at the end of the day. I think, and I want to speak to all of the pastors that are in here. Is I'll say it. The Methodist Church needs you more than you need the Methodist Church. Based on the demographic shifts that we have in this country and where things are moving, you are more needed than what you need the Methodist Church for. Now, that's not the story that is painted out there. It almost feels like they're doing us a favor as minorities for having us being part of their whatever conference is that you're part of it. But I do believe it starts by by you owning your place and knowing that. I mean, there's 1,000 pastors here in North Georgia. I mean, there's only a handful of pastors that can speak 2 languages. And there's hundreds of thousands of people that speaks 2 languages. And I believe that's the case in most of you guys' places. So start owning that and start trying to leverage that as much as you can. When April came, to start a church, the first conversation from them was, okay, you have 2 more months, before the summer, and then year 1, ends. And my conversation was like, we're going to restart the clock. If we're here in April, way behind that what we are supposed to be, that wasn't because of me. That was because of 12 individuals that, and I'll say it, they are more concerned about their kingdom than the kingdom of God. So we're gonna reset the clock and then put this church in the biggest chance to succeed. So we restart the clock, and for me that's what, like, okay, we have to become, you know, self-sustainable, at least in that moment, at least to, you know, we start renting a high school with the operations of the church. And now, you know, 4 years now, this past April, we celebrated 4 years. I mean, we're fully self-sustainable, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the next half, and how we reach that by God's grace, and how we make some decisions that, you know, that as a pastor, I had to figure out how to, you know, have a spiritual hat, but also have a business hat, and how to move them around and walk into meetings, and maybe not be very pastoral, but, you know, for representing a business in that sense. So I'll respond deeper into the finances, into that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Karen?
Thank you for all the information you had gave us. Thank you for telling us your story, because that tells a lot to me. And my question is, I go to a white church where only my kids and we are Hispanic. And I have seen all the stuff that you have explained now. And I have invited people from a community, and everybody gets like, we don't belong there.
Mm-hmm.
Why you are there? And my question is, when you are trying to build your church to bring other communities in, how you create that connection, how you build that bridge that people can feel secure to come and join. That's one bit that my big challenges, because it's like, I don't know how to explain people that they don't have to be scared or afraid or.
Yeah. Thank you, Karen. And, you know, prior for me starting this church, I was right there where you were, right? I was a Hispanic pastor of a white church in the white suburbs here in Georgia. And I was there for 10 years, and, you know, did some good stuff, made a lot of mistakes in the process. And me personally was trying to wrestle into, how do I convince white people not to be racist and to be more inclusive? And how do I convince a Hispanic congregation not that by nature tries to segregate themselves, to be also open-minded to the idea that there's people that don't look like them, don't speak the language, but they want to welcome them into the church. And that is a struggle from both sides. And you know, I believe the first thing that I believe is labels produce products. So once again, when we started doing ministry in my previous church, and I was appointed as a Hispanic pastor, just by nature of having that title, it diminished my authority within the white congregation. Because they didn't felt the need to have to go, you know, through my spiritual authority. They would just go around me, because they were like, I'm not Hispanic and you're the Hispanic pastor. I'm going with the white guy or the white lady. And therefore that was a challenge for me to try to teach them, you know, to help them understand a new reality of ministry. In the same way, when the Hispanic community, I mean, you know, yes, it was comforting to know that I was a Hispanic pastor for them, but what I was telling them too is that, you know, them and the pastor, we were just, you know, an annexum of the church. That at any point, I mean, you know, we could grow up like a cancer and we just be, you know, cut out. So what we start doing as a church is, okay, how do we avoid this segregation? And how do we move away from labels? It happened, and I believe that happens in most of Hispanic ministries within Anglo churches, that you have, you know, Caucasians that are very active into that ministry. That, you know, that God has touched their hearts and they want to be very active into it. Yet, once again, by we calling it Hispanic ministry, I mean, in essence, we're telling them, you know, you don't really belong here. I mean, yeah, you can be part of it and it's awesome, but at the end of the day, you know, it is this awesome there. So we as a church, you know, we went from, you know, we stopped calling it Hispanic ministry, and then we try to, you know, be more inclusive and call it like Spanish speaking ministry. That means you don't have to be Hispanic, but if you speak Spanish, you can belong. Then we discovered that also, you know, second generation don't speak Spanish, or they don't like to speak Spanish. So it's okay. How do we, once again, create a model that doesn't segregate the children and their children? So we take that away and we say, you know, it's going to be a global ministry, trying to be more inclusive. But then even that, I was struggling that why this still has to be like, why do I have to put it a label to make it fit? And the what is it called? How do you say in English? The last drop, I guess, that spilled the beans or whatever it's called. That's two different.
The straw that broke the camel's back. That's
There you
it.
are. Thank you. I know it was a term that didn't make any sense either, but it was a different one. I was in a meeting and the senior pastor, you know, started complaining about some of the Hispanic kids making a mess, and he said, Rodrigo, I'm gonna ask you to take care of this because the Hispanic kids are doing this, and I told him no. And so, and it was, you know, it was in front of, it was a big church. There were 5 different pastors and myself. And he said, what do you mean no? He said, I'm not going to do anything toward Hispanic kids. If you told me the name of these kids, I'll go and address what you want me to address. But said, I've been here for 8 years and I have never heard you or anybody else call the white Caucasian kids. You'll call them, you know, Billy broke a window, or Johnny, you know, broke something, or Lucy did whatever it is. But you need to stop naming these kids and put them in a box. And I discovered that, I mean, not only, yes, he was racist, but also, I mean, I have had my share in the process by continuing to segregate, you know, the ministry that I was leading. So at that point, it was like, I mean, I'm just a pastor of the church, and the community that happens to come that speaks Spanish, they're just as valuable members as anybody else, and we're not going to call it anything else. The church was Northbrook. That's the name, that Northbrook United Methodist Church. And we saw that empowered both groups to really, you know, start living a different reality. Because the Anglo church, they realized that, well, I mean, we cannot kick them out because there's, you know, now there's not a group. If anything, we have to start kicking one by them, you know, Jose, Maria, Gerardo, whatever it is. It's not a unit that you have to kick out. They just happen to be members of the church. And for the Hispanic congregation, it's also like, well, I mean, there's nothing else that make us feel a little bit second-class citizens. We just belong into this. And I think that's the difference. I think people will go to places where they feel welcome. People will stay, they feel value. And I think that's a critical piece for us as leaders. How do we empower and give value to the congregation that they can live into that? If that makes sense a little bit, Karen.
Thank you.
Maribel?
Thank you. My experience is completely different. I was, I think, a congregational pastor. And my problem is that my church, the church that I belong to, has so much potential. And the pastor that is there now wants to have solo power over every committee, everything happening. So I guess that when he was giving this church, the church was about to close. But the thing is that he continues there with poor leadership. He doesn't want to delegate. So I came in as a divinity school graduate. I was giving the position of congregational pastor, pastoral care. Then the pandemic happened, and he started pretty much getting all the power again into his hands without giving me or giving any other people voice into what to do, into continue preaching, into continue reaching out to members of the congregation, to the point that he has silenced most of us, put us to the side. He's making all the decisions. In the interim, the church has not got involved into the needs of the community, has not completely is stuck at this point without outreaching ministries, without having the opportunity to be the light during the pandemic so it can continue growing. So looks like, and this is a sideline comment, that members of the congregation have tried to voice their frustration with this pastor, but for some reason the bishop of the conference or the people that are above are not listening to their plea. So my hands, feet, I mean, the congregation is reaching out to me, but the fact that this, pastor is shutting me down, I feel that I have my hands tied. And the church is mostly Haitian. They need a Hispanic service. So I was confident that I could get the church moving to different levels, because I feel that I both of us were a good team. But right now it's either I give it up and go to a different denomination that is welcoming me, which is the Catholic Church, or I fight with this pastor. And I don't even know what to do at this point.
Thank you for sharing, Maribel. I don't know if, to be honest, I have an answer to that particular question about what you should do. And I'll be happy to have a side conversation with you about it and maybe hear more about your context before giving, an advice that may be life-changing for you without knowing much. But you made something that actually can help transition to my next point. Is I believe in the kingdom of God, there's always going to be room for both. For in this particular case, Hispanic background that we have, first-generation churches and what we call the multi-ethnic church. The border won't be closed. There are going to be people that will continue to come that only speak Spanish, or other places around the world, that a service that can meet their needs, a pastor, a congregation that can attend to the needs that they have that are very unique as fresh foreigners into this country, it is essential. What we have failed in the United Methodist Church is to realize that it's also a second part of this. In this case, multi-ethnic churches. In this case, churches that can help the children of their children and their children to belong. Those who decide to go into a mixed marriage, those who decide, to go deeper into the culture where they live, and that's where there is a both and in the kingdom of God. And I believe, God calls us all to different things. We need all different kind of parts of the body. I was exposed to a first-generation church, and I did my best. And for the circumstances that I shared earlier, I believe God was calling me to this particular kind of church. I end up my last, or the first part of the point of the presentation, with this idea that okay, God has given me a God-given vision of what to do, and it was this idea of a multi-ethnic church. The second piece that I needed to address is, okay, how do I start living into this? Because to your point, David, on April of 2016, we launched as a church. I reset the clock financially, but at the end of the day, I only have 50 people that were socioeconomically diverse, that we were nowhere close to become a self-sustainable church. And at that point, we were what I'm going to call right now a homeless church. And we operate in a high school that way for roughly 12 months, until on April of 2017, my district superintendent called me and said, hey, you have a growing church. I think at that point we may have around 120 people. I mean, we doubled what we started, but we were not close to become self-sustainable for the reason that I mentioned earlier. And in the other hand, I have a church close by that it is declining, that they have a debt in their buildings, and that I don't know what to do with them. So I thought about it. The DS told me, can you merge both churches? And that was the term that they used. And my response was like, no. And let me tell you why. Because I have a very young church that it is too young to merge. They're roughly 12 months old. And I think in church life, it relates to the life of a child. A church that is 1 year old is like a 1-year-old kid. A church that is 5-year-old is like 5. A church that is 40-year-old is like a 40 grown-up man that is, stubborn and don't want to do anything, right? It just really relates in that sense. But spiritually, it says, I cannot do this to the Nett church because we're too young. As a business person, I say like, if I don't do something soon, we're going to be bankrupt. I need $500,000 to get a piece of land close by. And then you already start jumping into financially. I look at the property. It was a bit of property, but and they owe at that point roughly $100,000 out of a roughly $2 million piece of land. So we pray about it, and I talked to my leadership team, and I said, we're going to do it because of a financial decision. As simple as that. We're going to go, and we're going to go and take over that church. There's 120 of us. There's like 20 of them. Simple math, people. We have seen that in the Alamo, right? Numbers will win. We'll go and we'll take over that building for simply financial reasons. And I'm not saying that's the most spiritual thing to do, but as a leader, I needed to feed my kids. We deal with the congregation, we deal with a demographic that's what they do, right? That's what they're here, because that's what they have to feed their kids. We walk into that church, and the word hostile, we lived it out. There were, people calling me all kind of names, and calling my people, because they were full of tattoos or whatever it is, all kind of names. And the reality is that I needed to call them all kind of names too. And not in a bad way, but the reality is like, this is the reality. You guys are about to die. And the DS and nobody was telling them that. They were just going around, that reality. Say, you guys have a shelf life. So you guys can be part of who we are, and we love to welcome you guys. We're a multi-ethnic church, or you don't. We're gonna keep the building, and that's how by June of 2017, just our 1-year anniversary, we went and we made this place our place. In the left you see a little bit of what the church looked like, and we make it our own. Now there's 2 things that I want to mention in here that is important. The first one, it is as a pastor, I needed to make sure we kept our DNA as a church. And it was hard. And let me tell you a little bit why. As a homeless church that we started, you're hungry all the time for people, right? Because people won't come to you because there's nowhere for them to come to you. You have to go to them. The idea of having a building creates this promised land mentality that, okay, we arrive, right? And you rest. And my point, and we don't have to show up at the high school at 6 a.m. with a trailer. to make church happen. And my idea is, okay, guys, I mean, yeah, we don't show up at 6 in the morning to unload a trailer, but we're still gonna show up at 6 in the morning to pray and to do ministry and to reach out people. So it was my responsibility to keep the DNA of the church, which was a missional church, alive. The second thing, because these 20 white members of the previous church, believe it or not, they would, I mean, they just didn't leave. I mean, they fought, which makes no sense to me. Now with time, I have understood a little bit more about some of those things. But I mean, it was a fight. I mean, every single inch of the way. And a lot of the fight, it was based on the church, on the building itself. And I want to give them credit. You know, that's a church that they built literally from scratch. That's a church where they put all their heart for, 70 years. And we come in and just pretty much, taking that place. It was hard for them. But it was needed, because as we were, ripping out carpet or painting walls or changing stuff, I mean, they saw their church, be taken away. And my goal wasn't for them to really feel like their church was taken away, but it was for them to understand that it wasn't their church anymore. One other thing that we decided to do as a church is that, I mean, every single aspect that you see in the building, we did it ourselves. We changed the carpet, we laid the floors, we paint the walls, we build the tables. We did not spend a single penny outsourcing the job, but it just developed ownership into it. So all of a sudden, I went and asked for the $75,000 that the conference was supposed to give us. And once again, they didn't want to give us because we were not buying land. But that's when negotiations starts. So we get it, and we probably stretch that money, maybe $150,000 worth of renovations, because we did the work ourselves. So it was my job to preserve the DNA. It was my job to really, like a fixer-upper kind of thing mentality, to let them understand that the facilities were changing. It was my role as well to make sure the leadership of the church, continue to carry on the vision and help them in that sense, and to continue to live out the culture of the church. So that year, we moved 120 people from a high school to the building, and we were able to start seeing growth happening, because yes, having a facility 24/7, helped us to do that. We had $100,000 roughly worth of debt, but my business mentality was like, okay, even if it doesn't work, we just sell it, and we'll sell it for $2 million. We pay $100,000 that we owe, and we make $1.9 million to go somewhere else. In 2018, on April or May of that year, I get a phone call from a district superintendent, and he said, "Hey, I have another church that is in a similar circumstances. There's a little bit more than them. There's like 30 of them. Would you do it again?" And it's funny because my wife will tell you, in the midst of that process, the first year with the first campus, it was like having a kid, right? You're in the middle of sleepless night. You're changing diapers all the time, and you're just exhausted. They say, I'll never do it again. I'm never gonna have another kid. And then what, the kid starts walking and he's kind of cute. Say, yeah, it was fun. Well, let's do it again, right? You forget how painful it was, and that's kind of what happened. We were reaching a honeymoon period. Like, okay, we have a facility. This is our ministry. We're doing incarnational stuff in the community, and we're only $100,000 in debt. I mean, we can do it again. So the opportunity of a second campus presented. And in here, the challenge for us, and I'll say it, was one, to be more gracious to understand, and for me that was a humbling lesson, that the people from that church, they also belong to the kingdom of God, and they have something to bring to the table. So it's not, we're not gonna go and do another hostile takeover. Can we contextualize our ministry into their facilities, into the way they're doing it? And it's a historical church, so we try to, once again, okay, how do we contextualize that? How do we go from, a contemporary space into a traditional space? How do we do ministry like that? And that's when innovating in ministry is everything, right? If the idea that if we don't reach out to everyone, our mission is still incomplete, we cannot be arrogant enough to believe that our style of worship is the way to do it. So as a church, we have two non-negotiables. The first one is being a multi-ethnic church, and I spoke about the diversity of the leadership. And the second one being a missional church, to the extent that the fourth Sunday a month, we cancel worship and we deploy the congregation to serve the community. We call it Mission Sundays. We start doing that from the high school, and when we get our building, the first campus, same thing. We close the doors and we go and deploy the congregation. So when we move into this context, our second campus, I thought it was a white church. They had roughly 35 people. I thought the multi-ethnic piece was going to be the hard sell for them. It wasn't. Being a missional church was a completely, revolutionary thing for them. They couldn't comprehend that, and it's a church that has been open for 187 years. They couldn't comprehend that we were going to close the building on Sundays, the one Sunday a month. So for all the challenge was, okay, how do we, it's easy to kill something and give it birth than to transfer a DNA, to be able to teach them. And it's harder because it takes more work. It takes more intentionality. It takes going the extra mile. How do we, produce our DNA in them? How do we honor the facilities? I mean, as you see the building, I mean, can we make disciples of Jesus Christ without having to bring, all kind of lights and fog machines or whatever it is, drums and everything? I mean, if we believe that we want to reach out to every single one in Gwinnett County, then there's people that like that. So how do we honor those facilities? How do we multiply leadership? Because at the end of the day, they needed to start buying it so they can convince one another. And that produces, a different kind of culture. I mean, this whole concept of doing Mission Sunday was a revolutionary concept for them. And I had meetings with them, and they were like, Pastor, that is blasphemy. Jesus tells us to go to church. And I will see them, okay, guys, let's open the Bible. Let's look at all the red letters that are there. And what did Jesus say to go to church? But, I have a 95-year-old lady that she's been going to that church since her mom was born. Since she was born, her parents are buried in the cemetery. And she said, like, I've been coming to this church every single Sunday for all my life. And now you're telling me that, I cannot, that the church is going to be closed. And it's just helping them try to reframe words and say, like, I'm not telling you that church is closed. The building is closed, but the church is still open. And you can continue to go to church, just not in this building, but now you have to go to the grocery store and bless those around you. And I won't go into a lot of details into what we do in those Mission Sundays, but it's service in the community. That's what it's all about. So, and I told them, for 1 year, we're going to keep this service alive, and we're going to hold it accountable in the same way that we are holding the other service in the other location accountable. And if it grows, it grows. And if not, we shut it down. And in a year, from 2018 to 2019, we saw a traditional service of 35 people going almost to 120. And the interesting thing, which is just amazing to me, is probably because of the style of the worship service, start bringing a diverse congregation as well. We have a lot of people from West Africa coming to that service that have an Anglican background. But that service start generating, revenue to keep the church self-sustainable. So in 6 months after that, I told the church, okay, now we are a church in 2 locations. Let's see if we can get out of debt, and then let's see what God can do. So can we pay this note that we have of $100,000 in 6 months? And I threw a challenge to the church, and by God's grace, we were able to accomplish that. So all of a sudden, 2 years after we launched the church, we have roughly 25 acres in Gwinnett County, debt-free. And then in last year, in 2019, I had a similar conversation with a third campus with my district superintendent. And he presented to me a church, and I kind of became like the dumpster, of the district. But I told you before, all these homogeneous churches, they have a shelf life in this county. So at that point, I was presented the opportunity of a third campus that they have roughly 9 individuals. So we met with them, and they were given 2 options. You can vote to merge, or you can vote to close. And they voted 5-4 to close. So they closed the church. That location, that building, it is located in the poorest zip code of this county, where the biggest need is. So for us, it brought a conversation of how do we repurpose these facilities for the sake of the gospel? What kind of ministry do we need to do in here? And we start paying attention to the needs in the county, and we discover that homelessness, it is the biggest need. Homelessness and poverty are the biggest needs. So the conversation started in, okay, how do we leverage these assets to meet, people's needs? How do we develop community partners? Because at this point, while we were, finished paying our debt in the other buildings, we were not a rich church by any means. We probably have between both services in the previous 2 campuses, around 350 people committed to Christ. But it was still a multi-ethnic crowd, or is still a multi-ethnic crowd that is not a rich church. So how do we create a self-sustainable model? So we start, taking this campus and start looking, okay, what can we do with it? Long story short, we decided that we wanted to do 4 different things. We wanted to impact people financially. We wanted to impact people socially. We wanted to impact people emotionally. And we wanted to impact people spiritually. What does that look like? We were able to partner with the government and a couple of nonprofits to open a homeless shelter for women and children in that place. We are the only homeless shelter in the county, in a county that has roughly 1 million individuals, and based on the census, roughly 50,000 people living in the streets without shelter. So we were able to partner with the government and a couple of nonprofits that have the funds, and that's when that's when the business hat comes again handy, because you start thinking, okay, I have something that they don't have, and that is a piece of real estate in a prime location. The ballot market for that land was just the land itself was roughly $3 million. Now, they have what I don't have, and that's money to put into the building. So how do we partner to do both things? So we negotiated with the county and with a couple of, United Way and a couple of agencies that said, can we make a homeless shelter? And just like the parable of, Jesus and the fish and the bread is, let's see what everybody can bring to the table. So we brought to the table of facilities, beat up. There were I mean, they were beat up. The county came with $500,000, and a couple of private agencies came with $500,000. So in 6 months, we were able to not rebuild, but just got out the facilities and turned them into a homeless shelter with a value of putting into the facility roughly $1 million for us as a church, debt-free. The second piece that we decided to do, it is, okay, addressing homelessness with a shelter is just, at the end of the day, a Band-Aid to the situation. How do we empower people to get out of the cycles, whatever they may be, alcoholism, drugs, domestic abuse, etc. And that's when we created an assessment center that can help, the clients and even those outside of the clients to, get job training, break their cycles of addiction, be able to be, reintegrated into society. And we partnered, with DFACS. We partnered with a couple, the Salvation Army. And this is what we discovered is there's a lot of nonprofits or a lot of individuals wanting to do good. A lot of times what is missing is just somebody that is willing to bring everybody to the table. And that's what we did. I mean, I don't feel that we did anything special, but facilitating and God carry on the conversations. And then, the spiritual component, it is, of course, we have worship there in that facility. So that facility, we split the building in 3 different sections: a homeless shelter, an assessment center, and the church. Not only we have been able to put $1 million worth of ministry into the building, because of the partners that are coming, we have a clinic, the Good Samaritan Clinic. They pay rent. We have the Salvation Army coming to do ministry. They pay rent. Now we have a campus that is generating to us roughly $80,000 worth a year of revenue for us to put into ministry. And that's kind of how we end up with those 3 campuses. And so 4 years later, that since we launched, now as a church, we're fully self-sustainable, David. We have a roughly $600,000 budget that we can meet, and we have, 3 facilities that are, just under 34 acres in Nett County that are probably value total maybe $11 million because of the place where we are, and they're all debt free. And honor and glory to Jesus and to God, but it does takes this idea of, okay, the church has to do more than just being a religious institution. We can connect the public sector and the faith sector like nobody else. And as United Methodists, once again, I was, complaining about the brokenness of it. The reason where we are is because of the United Methodist Church. If North Carolina or Florida or all these places are like North Georgia, there's Methodist churches almost in every corner. When you go to the street, you pick up a rock, throw it to the sky, and you break a church window somewhere. And a lot of those are all buildings that are already paid off or that have little debt. And yes, the business didn't work, right? And it's just like a restaurant. You don't put a restaurant, you don't put a Pizza Hut in the same place that a Papa John's didn't work. So but the location is still prime. So it's okay. Maybe God give you a different calling, a different vision to do it. And how do you reinvent it to make it self-sustainable? I strongly believe that the days of churches being self-funded by the offering plates are behind us, and we need to tap into other sources of revenue that can help us achieve our goals, which is impacting the community. So that's in a nutshell of how we went from from an idea that didn't work as a church plant into now a model that it is taking traction in here in North Georgia. So I'm gonna open up for questions. I'm gonna let Sandra talk.
I posted a question because from the earlier conversation, second and third generation and so forth. But right now, the question I'd like to ask you, so I'm not a pastor, I'm a certified lay minister. I've been very much involved with prison ministry. I'm also with the disaster ministry that we've started a new pilot program for the Hispanic community, Trabajando Juntos.
Okay.
But in reference to something that's been in my heart, especially now with the reentry, and that is such a big, right? And you were talking about the ministry of the homeless and the shelter and so forth. I have always hoped and wondered, how can we, particularly now that reentry is becoming, a conscious, it's in the front now of everybody's mind. How is it that the church, like building shelters, that we do not have halfway houses or reentry homes, that we don't use some of our property, a building that would, be a home for someone who is coming out of prison now. We need women's homes is particularly, it's bad enough there are not enough beds or homes for men. For women is so much more. And on that list, for families, a mother with a child, or, and so here is a great opportunity, mission work for the church, right? And that's something that, as I said, I'm a lay person. I'm older now, but my vision and my hopes, I'm a good grunt worker. I'm good on the ground. Don't put me, behind the desk or with that thinking cap of yours. But thank God for those that are able to do this. How could we, find a way to make this? I think that's all a part of the disaster team. In fact, I was in a meeting today that we actually talk about that. Disaster ministries, these are broken souls in home, and how would we be able to, tie that work instead of separating it, that it is all under that one umbrella. I don't know if I made myself clear, but
Yeah, you have, Sandra, and I appreciate that. And I think, I don't know if this is an answer, but just a statement. If not, it is, we, the church, need to reclaim our biblical responsibilities to that demographic. Taking care of the widow, of the orphan, of the poor. That has been the church's job or responsibility from, for centuries. We have, kicked the can down the road, or we have throw it to the government and say, hey, you guys deal with that because, we don't have the money, or we over spiritualize things and we just want to focus in the spiritual element of an individual. But we are responsible for a holistic approach. And I think you're absolutely right. I think start by the churches owning and reclaiming that responsibility. And then, okay, how do we leverage our assets? Absolutely right. One of the conversations we're having in the back of that shelter, we have roughly 3 acres of land, and what it looks like to build a tiny home community there. That in order to move people, in this case, from homelessness to home ownership, you have to walk people side by side. A couple of years ago, me and my wife, we became foster parents. And one of the things that we discovered in the foster journey is that, we will receive the kids, right, when they were taken away from mom or dad or somebody else. While the system is still broken, the children do get help. But in this case, let's say the mom that the kid was taken away, she's given, 10, 15, a list of expectations, to get a job, to get a home, to stop drinking, whatever it is, without any kind of help. And so it is a completely unrealistic expectation from them. So in here, we, you have, gentlemen or ladies, leaving our prison system and trying to reintegrate in society. We have a society that will not give them jobs because they have a background that will not pass, when they don't have a good credit score, when they don't have perhaps any kind of skills. So I mean, we need to break the cycle, and in order to do that, we need to walk with people. I think we have missed the mark as a church. We have focused so much in worshiping with people, not in walking with people. That's what the disconnect. That's what the disconnect is.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you very much. And I did post a question on the second and third generation. So what I love about what you had said earlier in your congregation and the diversity of it, and there's room for both, because I grew up, I was born and raised in New York City. My church in La Hermosa Christian Church in Spanish Harlem, that's still standing there, right there on 110 and Fifth Avenue, right where Central Park ends. So my story is I was the rebel. I did not grow up in church. My family did. My brother definitely did. And my cousins, I have cousins that today they just have nothing to do with church. And here the black sheep, if you will, la que no quería saber nada de la iglesia. I've surrendered my life to Christ. And when I have some conversations with my cousins, it's like, no, man, I'm don't want to hear it, está bueno ya. And they're good. They just work hard. They're good parents. And they just got turned off. And it breaks my heart. It really does. Like, I keep praying, Lord, bring healing, talk about reconciliation and restoration, to these families and their children, because that's what I'm looking now at. Their children.
Thank you, Sandy. We also want to give space for others. If others have comments or questions as well, feel free to share those now.
It's just like talking with my kids and tell them instructions and they don't say anything. Either they understood everything or they didn't understand anything. And and we go with that.
Rodrigo, maybe this is just another comment about everything you did and everything you shared with us today. I really appreciate it, and I'm so blessed to hear you at your story. I just remember when you started today and talk about your calling and all the strong things and came to you, and the opportunity also to do this wonderful ministry. I remember John Wesley when one time when several persons came to make a line to talk to him because they heard that Wesley had been choosing itinerant preachers or lay preachers.
Mm-hmm.
And many of them, they came and talked to him. And there was one guy I think he's looking like it's someone else who was not on the line, and said, I want to talk to you, but I want to let you know that I got a calling from God to do this ministry or to preach. And he said, well, wait for me. And then he finished the others, and the guy came on the last on the line. When he came, he said to me, Wesley said to the guy, you said you have the calling of God. Let me check in on you if you have the anointing. And I feel in your story and confirm to me this word that's wonderful from Wesley. And you know, Wesley has in the past 3 lines of requirement for his preachers. He called his preachers, my preachers. One was first, calling from God. The second, need to be anointed, need to feel that they are anointing from God to do that ministry. And the third was he needed to provide fruits. When you preach, he said, if you don't have fruits, that is not word of God. Word of God need to have fruits.
Yeah.
And I can see in your ministry something like that. I don't know how I can explain. I don't have the words to say that, but I can feel and I appreciate it. Thank you for the blessing that you brought to us today. Thank you.
Thank you,
Amen
David.
to that. Thank you, David.
We have a question by Elizabeth. She's asking en español, ¿cómo romper con los esquemas de que el trabajo de la iglesia tiene que quedarse en la misma congregación? So, you know, right, when the church has a vision that the work of the church has to stay within the walls of the church. She's saying it's many times, you know, these dynamics keep us inside the church, that we say the world is our parroquia, it's our church, but the church resists to go out and serve. How do we break with those dynamics of the church?
Yeah, and I don't know if this is an easy answer or not, but if there is a time when you can have a backup to answer that question, it is right now in the midst of a pandemic. I think God has made answer that, you know, for you. You know, the first weekend when we cancel live worship at the church, when we close the building, my statement to the congregation was, "Church, we were built for this. You know, we were called to leave the church building by Jesus, not by the CDC. I mean, leaving the building of the church is not, you know, a nice idea. It is a necessity for the gospel." And I use this analogy a lot, and hopefully it could be helpful. When I was, you know, the second campus, you know, the congregation, to try to move them to do ministry outside the walls, the pushback that I got often was, "What about us, right? Pastor, you need to nurture us. You need to, you know, you need to grow into us." So I started, you know, preaching for a whole month, you know, this story of Jesus and of the 99 sheep and the one. The problem with that story is that we often look at that story like if it's either or. That Jesus will either be with the 99 or be with the one. Now, theologically, the concept is that, I mean, Jesus can be in both places, right? I mean, we have an omnipresent God. But my big point, it is, church, we are called to go with the one. And that doesn't mean I'm going to leave you the 99. What we're going to do is I'm going to bring the 99 with me. That's how I like to see that parable. That you're not leaving the congregation to go and take care of those who are outside the walls. Is that you tell your people, you need to come with me to go and get those outside the walls. And I was trying to tell that to the church, and it just wouldn't click. And finally, my 5-year-old gave me an example that it make it click. After his first day of going to kindergarten, my 5-year-old came home, and he came starving. And you know, he ran out of the bus and went straight to the kitchen and started eating a bunch of food. So I was talking with him and said, "Dude, like, why are you so hungry? We gave you lunch." And then he said, "Well, I shared my lunch with another kid that didn't have lunch." And then he said, "Are you upset with me for doing that?" I mean, and as a parent, I mean, heck no, absolutely. I'm thankful that you decided to do something like that. That you decided to, you know, and in a 5-year-old context, sacrifice half the sandwich and give it PBJ and give it to another kid so you both will have something. And what I told the congregation, it is, we said, you need to close the church, the building on Sunday mornings. And there is a pastor, that is the most important hour for us as a church. And I understand that because, that's what they've been told. And I said, unless you are willing to sacrifice the most important thing for you for the sake of others, you will not understand it. And then I shared the analogy of my kid. I mean, do I want my kid to go hungry? No. Do I want my kid to not share what he had for the sake of another kid eating? Absolutely yes. And for us, and I don't know if this will help to you, that help people understand that, it's not just about me. And reaching people for Christ is not a matter of doing it on your free time. It is a matter of doing it when it's a sacrifice, when you have to go the extra mile, when it's gonna cost you something, and it is moving people from a lack of a better term, a self-centered theology and mentality into a communal theology.
Thank you, Pastor Rodrigo. Any other questions, Lourdes?
Thank you, Rodrigo, for sharing all this. It's really inspiring. And I am in Wisconsin and with an Anglo church right now. I had an experience with multicultural church in New Jersey, and that was a great experience. And here, I'm here for about 2.5 years. And when I completed my first year, our church burned down, and we had to start from scratch to rebuild the building. And the building is ready, and our first service in this new building is going to be July the 5th. But I am praying because now that we start rebuilding the church, so I'm praying for God and trying to look at other opportunities to inspire the church and to do other things. And this quarantine, we've been doing few things that is already a step outside of the comfort zone. And it's a place mainly Anglo, not really many people from different countries or from different racial background around. But even though we do have opportunity to share the gospel around, and so it's really inspiring what you are sharing. And what I understand from all of this, and I do trust in what you said, we need to have a holistic church. Otherwise, that's what I see in Jesus Christ. He didn't see only the physical need, or he saw the whole picture of the need and he helped. And I think that is what the church should be doing as well. So at this time, with this social distancing, starting to reopen church, and you have 3 campus, how are you envisioning to, you have already the experience to be outside, and what advice or extra advice from what you already said you could suggest for, in this case, an Anglo from middle-aged upper church to do some project that could inspire others on this discipleship journey and spreading the gospel, the love of God to others.
Thank you for sharing, Lord, your journey. And I guess my word would be, I strongly believe in a God that continues to speak to people, that continues to give people vision bigger than that we can imagine, that continue to to challenge us to cross the Red Sea, to to live the land that we're comfortable, and to go to territories that we haven't walked or we haven't seen. I continue that God continues to do that, and that looks different for everybody. Right? I think the challenge sometimes when we hear some stories is, okay, how do I make that happen in my context, that I can reproduce that, and it may just look a little bit different in yours. So my first point would be, pray to God for a God-given vision. I mean, for a goal, for a size, for a dream. I mean, bigger than we can imagine. And to be bold, to be courageous, to risk for the gospel, to risk for the sake of love. That one day when when you retire and those around you, maybe I don't want to be dramatic, but even those who go to your funeral can say, you know what, I mean, Lourdes, she didn't play church. I mean, she gave it all she had. At the end of the day, the outcome is up to God. The obedience is up to us. So I want to encourage you to do that, to ask God for a God-given vision, for a dream that is bigger than you can imagine, and to give it a shot. To give it a shot, you may come up with an idea like I had that blow up in your faces, and then God's grace is going to be there. I mean, I'll be happy to, maybe also on the side eventually, share more with you and to hear more about your context. But I mean, God needs the church more than, or God can use the church more than ever. And if you're in a church, you're in a position to be used by God big time.
Thank you, Pastor Rodrigo. Well, it's already 7:04, so we understand, that the webinar, we want to respect your time as well, and we've had time for questions. If you have any other questions, feel free to message those to me. I can send those over to Pastor Rodrigo and begin a conversation like that as well offline. Again, thank you all so much for being here. You'll be receiving more information about our next webinar for July. We hope to see some of you there. Again, we're going to be talking about trauma and how to do pastoral care in trauma. Thank you, Pastor Rodrigo, for these 2 hours of your wisdom, of your experience. All of us have learned so much from that.
Well, thank you guys for having me. And I know Catherine has my information. Feel free to reach out to her, and I'll be happy to, you can share my information with them. And Edgar, thank you, campeón, for la traducción, man.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll see you all soon. Have a good night.
It's good to meet you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Hasta la vista. Ciao, Edgar.
Muchas bendiciones a todos.